I would like to call this meeting to order now. It is 7:02 on July 14th, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Research. If the Spanish language interpreters, can you please give the information on Spanish language interpretation?
Buenas tardes, ya son las 7:02 de la tarde y tenemos foro para empezar la reunión el 14 de julio de 2022. Para las personas que ocupan interpretación en español, pueden darle en el botón de Spanish y pueden ir al canal de interpretación y voy a estar yo y otro intérprete para interpretar la reunión.
Thank you so very much, Maria. So appreciate that. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Andrea and Amanda. You can pin their video feed if that is helpful to you. Finally, the closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. But please note that this is an automatic captioning service and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon state law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for the commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will also be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meeting and agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. I would like to move to our land acknowledgement. The purpose of our land acknowledgement is to center the traditional native inhabitants of the land upon which we live. We want to respectfully acknowledge the Chinook, the Clatskanie, the Kalapuya, and the Multnomah and the Clackamas, the last two tribal nations who are missing from this map, who are now part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde because of the genocide that occurred in the creation of this country. We honor those who have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and we pay our personal respects to their elders, both past and present. Thank you so much. I'd like to remind us of the community agreements. I invite us to read these to ourselves, and then I'll call for the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you, everyone. May I have a show of accepting these agreements? Either a thumbs up or happy fingers. Thank you so very much. I would like to invite our co-chairs to talk to us about the timeline. And
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
yeah, very good, Victoria, you're in the right space.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. I'm Angie Tomlinson, Commissioner Tomlinson, she, her pronouns. And the commission is currently in the fact-finding phase of work, expecting to go into August. It includes hearing from key stakeholders, identifying barriers to accountability in Portland presently, and examining systems of accountability from other jurisdictions. It also includes increased community engagement work. Future phases of work will develop parameters for the new police accountability system before the commission presents that to the city council for their consideration and approval. There's the timeline right here, and then the next slide here, sorry. Following today's meeting, here are the next several upcoming meetings of the PAC. The Subcommittee on Research will hold its next meeting July 25th. The Subcommittee on Community Engagement Events will meet next on July 18th. The full commission will continue to meet and hold briefings July 21st with the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform, who is an amicus, as well as City Commissioner Rubio, and July 28th with the Portland Police Association, which is the police union, as well as City Commissioner Ryan. And then we see on here that we have that we are, well, I don't know if it shows it on here, but we are on our third PAC subcommittee meeting on our subcommittee on research meeting, and we're expected to have 3 more after this. So I think that it shows July 25th, August 1st, and then we have to schedule another one in August, probably the 1st or 2nd week of August.
Next slide, please.
Thank you. This slide is the current project plan for the fact-finding phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It's not the agenda, and it's not set in stone. This slide is mostly for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission sets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among commission members as to barriers to accountability in the current system, best practices from Portland and other jurisdictions, and suggestions to consider from experts, as well as taking public comment and meeting with key stakeholders. Sorry about that. Today's meeting is in the green box just below the center of the screen with the purple border. And today's meeting agenda focuses on member research conducted since the last meeting. Some subcommittee members had other jurisdictions to research in order to identify potential best practices. Other members had experts and academics who have written about police accountability or made direct suggestions to Portland to research and identify key takeaways that the subcommittee could recommend the full commission examine. We'll start with other jurisdictions, hearing 4-minute reports on each jurisdiction from the subcommittee member before discussing which items subcommittee members would like to recommend that the full commission designate as best practices. Then we'll identify next steps in research on other jurisdictions. We'll repeat the same process with expert and academics, and then take public comment towards the end of the meeting.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So best practices from other jurisdictions. We're going to go to the next slide. And members of the research reports that are scheduled for today possibly include Angie with Minneapolis, Sophia with Columbus, Ohio, and New Orleans, Louisiana, Louise Lovisa with Baltimore and Albuquerque, and Catherine with Chicago. We have some members that are present and some that are not. And so I'm wondering who would like to step forward first? I think Angie, you are prepared.
I don't know if I'm prepared.
Okay.
But, sorry. Yes. So I would like to talk a little bit about Minneapolis. If Dan Handelman wants to talk a little bit about Minneapolis also, because I've done a tiny about a little bit of research, but I really wanted to circle back with Dan because I think Dan has a little bit more information about that. I did want to circle back though to my San Francisco research that I had started the last meeting, and then Commissioner Handelman and I met, was it over last weekend or 2 weekends ago, Dan? I don't know. My life is really busy lately. Thank you. And we collected even more research on San Francisco, which I thought was really helpful and really good because Dan has everything organized by jurisdiction, but it's the same questions. And so we were able to collect more information to fill in his table, which I thought was really, really good because I like being able to compare apples to apples when it comes to jurisdictions, right? I did want to mention to the full commission that while we were researching, we found something very odd about San Francisco in that I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. Dan, I'm going to let everybody know about their about the San Francisco Patrol Special Police Association, which I did not know existed before our research. And let's see if I can give this to everybody. So I'm going to paste a link to it over. So while we were researching together, it came up that the San Francisco Police Commission, that it consists of 3 lawyers and 2 activists, also oversees the San Francisco Patrol Special Police Association. And you're like, what is the Patrol Special Police Association? And we kind of did a little surfing of the web, the great Google. And this is a private police organization. I don't even know what to call it. It's not under government. They can be hired and fired by the police commission, but they're not city employees. And it dates, I thought we saw that it dated back, it's 1847 in San Francisco. It was very odd. So I just wanted to bring up something very strange that we came across. And I don't know if other cities have these private patrol units, which I think is really odd. They carry guns, and I'm not sure what they can actually do, but I needed to bring that up because I thought it was really odd. And just to let everybody know that these types of things are out there still in San Francisco, which is a very liberal city, right? So anyway, I wanted to share that. And then Dan, is there anything else from San Francisco that we should be sharing? I mean, there was that oddity, but from the actual commission or from the Police Accountability Board, or I can't remember what they were called. I'm sorry, they have a specific name.
Right. So it's a very strange structure. We haven't filled in all the questions yet, but there's a Department of Police Accountability, which used to be called the Office of Citizen Complaints. It was changed a few years ago by the change in the charter. And that Department of Police Accountability, which does oversight and investigations of misconduct, as well as the police department itself, are both overseen by this civilian commission. So it's different from some of the other cities we've been looking at, and from the structure we're looking at right now here in this city, where it's going to be that the board that we're working on is going to be holding police officers accountable, but it doesn't have that overall authority over the entire police, at least not the way it's been proposed in the charter. So yeah, there's a lot more things I want to look up to try to fill in some of these gaps. one of the things I'm curious about is the question of how how the Department of Police Accountability compels officers to testify to them, whether they do that through the commission or some other way. So that's Commissioner Thomas and I need to find some more time to work together and dig into that.
Yes, we do. And then Dan, do you mind us talking a little bit more about Minneapolis? Because you sent me a little bit of information and I didn't get a chance to talk to you about it. So do you mind talking a little bit about that? I did go into their website, but there wasn't anything at their website that gave me information.
Yeah, so until a few years ago, and before George Floyd was murdered, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a body there called the Civilian Review Authority that was kind of like our IPR. They did the intake, internal affairs, the investigations, and then a community board made decisions about what the findings should be. And a number of times that board suggested finding officers out of policy, but the police chief refused to discipline those officers. So the community was very upset about it. They demanded a stronger system be put in place, and instead it got scrapped for a weaker system that has less authority. And despite this being ground zero for police accountability in 2020, when George Floyd was murdered by police officers, the kind of predominant activist movement that was working on stuff put forward an entire ballot measure to try to wipe out the police department and rebuild as a new community safety division, and that failed at the ballot. So as a result, there was no change made to this weaker oversight board because they thought they weren't going to have police anymore. And so I'm not really convinced that we need to look at the current model, but I think we need to look at what happened, and in terms of what happened to the community, just to look at some of the pitfalls for us all to avoid. So I'm going to try to do more research on what exactly happened with all that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for both of you for this. Does anybody have questions about San Francisco or about Minneapolis? Would love to make sure that we're looking at this from a best practices perspective, or where there is a lack of accountability.
So this is Debbie. I have a question just kind of about, in general, we're doing these our little research on different jurisdictions, and I know I wrote mine up in the form of a document and sent it out. I don't quite know how the Outlook system works, but is there a place where like we could have a folder that all of us could get to, that we put these little write-ups in one place, so if we wanted to like look at what other people have done, we could do that? So that's my question. You don't have to answer if you don't know the answer.
I personally do not know the answer, but I would like to call on staff.
Yeah, the way that I'll need to check in with the city attorney's office on how to do that to avoid the possibility of violating public meeting laws by having things that can be deliberative. So, and as well as with the Bureau of Technology Services with relation to how that would be stored from a public records perspective in order to answer that. So no, at the short term, but I think in the maybe in a week or two, what we could at least do as a temporary fix is to collect all of the documents that have been written up by folks and put them into an email back to the members, as well as put them up on the website as preparatory readings for the July 25th meeting of this subcommittee.
Thank you. And I wonder, what if we turn them into PDFs? Would that make it so that we couldn't deliberate? I don't know, just something to think about.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. Commissioner Dan, I see that you unmuted. Didn't know if you wanted to raise your hand or.
No, I look like I'm unmuted. My phone instrument is on mute, but
Okay.
my sound is not. But I mean, just to add to what was just said, I talked to a member of the commission who's not part of our subcommittee, and they were curious about what was going on with our research, and I realized we're sharing that research with other subcommittee members, and it'd be nice to be able to share it with the whole commission. But I guess we'll wait for what staff finds out, because I think it'd be good for everybody to have access to what we've been working on.
Thank you so much. Any questions or observations about Minneapolis or San Francisco? All right. Okay. Then, again, we're looking at best practices, and then we're also looking at where there is an inability to hold police accountable. Commissioner Lavisa, would you like to present?
Sure, thank you so much. Thanks everyone, nice to see you. Lavisa Lloyd, she, her, member of the commission. I was taking a look at Baltimore, Maryland just now, and I was just like, it's a little overwhelming what's going on in Maryland right now, the entire state of Maryland with police accountability. It's actually very interesting. The Maryland General Assembly passed the Police Accountability Act of 2021. Actually, there were like 4 Police Accountability Acts of 2021 passed in Maryland, which had an effective date of July 1st, 2022. So this, or at least this particular one about police accountability and discipline, just went into effect, or it's like the deadline for it going into effect has passed, but a lot of counties are still scrambling to implement it and to comply with it. But essentially, this is, many of you may remember the death, the murder of Freddie Gray Jr. in 2016. That was really the impetus. A lot of people worked together for a very long time, for like 6 years, to get this statewide legislation passed that impacts police accountability across the entire state of Maryland. Essentially, it creates this requirement that each local jurisdiction, so each county in Maryland, will establish 3 new boards: a police accountability board, an administrative charging committee, and a trial board. Hold on, I just had some stuff here. The bill passed last year requires the governing bodies of each jurisdiction to establish police accountability boards and administrative charging committees that will conduct investigations and decide the outcomes of police misconduct complaints brought by members of the public. Under the law, civilians can submit their complaints to the law enforcement agency or to their county police accountability board, which will then have 3 days to send the complaint to that department for investigation. So you can submit your complaint either place, but then it goes to the law enforcement agency and is investigated. The policing agency then sends its findings to the county's administrative charging committee, which will then decide if disciplinary charges should be filed against the officer. Active duty police officers are not eligible to serve on these boards. And although this bill, so this is House Bill 670 specifically, although it takes effect on July 1st, agencies with collective bargaining contracts that go past that date can maintain their current disciplinary policies until those contracts run out. So there is going to be some staggered implementation of it. And it's some jurisdictions like Caroline and Baltimore counties are only just beginning public conversations to take up the legislation. So it's a little confusing what's going on in Baltimore right now. They have many different overlapping systems. I'm sure, as a lot of you know, also in 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice investigated the Baltimore Police Department and found that they had engaged in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing. In 2017, Baltimore entered into a consent decree with them, and this consent decree is attempting to strengthen their current processes, but it's a bit of a fight. I would say Baltimore seems almost more like a cautionary tale than really like a best practice. I think the state legislation, the statewide legislation that's going into place is really fascinating and interesting, and probably I would say kind of on the more exciting end of the spectrum. But Baltimore City itself has had, for a long time, since 1999, has had what's called the Civilian Review Board. And the Civilian Review Board members are appointed by the mayor and they're confirmed by the city council. But historically, it's had a fairly limited scope of things that it can investigate. It only had like certain jurisdiction over allegations of abusive language, harassment, or excessive force complaints against officers, and traditionally has not had the power to enact discipline, only the power to recommend discipline. But there's a lot of fight, a lot of movement to see if the CRB can be, is it going to, it's a kind of a question, is it going to be strengthened? Is it going to be replaced? But essentially the CRB would create a finding of whatever the allegation is. Sometimes they would have a finding, and the Civilian Review Board would have a finding, and the IA Board would have a finding, and sometimes those findings would be different findings. And if that happened, then they were supposed to meet together in an attempt to find like a consistent finding. And if neither could, then it would just go to the police commissioner, who would review the findings and make a final decision. But ultimately, at the end of the day, with the CRB system, the police commissioner had the final decision-making responsibility on the appropriate disciplinary action in each case. Although technically no final action was supposed to be taken by the police commissioner until they had reviewed the recommendations of the board. So, but in my research I saw, it said police reform advocates and members of the CRB have long complained that it lacks the independence and the power, and I will say the money specifically, necessary to address misconduct, limited power, limited jurisdiction. And although the board is independent, its staff, including investigators, is housed within the City Office of Equity and Civil Rights. So actually, I don't know. Do I have the power to share my screen? I think I do. I can show you guys a flow chart of, at least in Anne Arundel County, they do have their kind of current compliant version sort of up and running, and they have a really cool flow chart about it. So you can kind of see that this is what that looks like. Your complaint comes in the green. It can come into the Police Accountability Board. It can come into the law enforcement agency. Either way, the law enforcement agency investigates it and then forwards that investigative file to the administrative charging committee, which is a civilian committee, and they review the investigatory file and determine whether or not to charge the officer. Then the officer has essentially they decide whether or not to charge the officer. They give that to the chief, and then the chief offers the discipline recommended by the ACC or a higher level. So the chief is able to deviate from what the administrative charging committee recommends, but he is only able to deviate upwards. He is not able to deviate downwards in discipline. So, and then the officer has the option to accept the discipline and then it's over, or to reject the discipline, in which case it goes to the trial board. I think the trial board is supposed to be 3 members. One is a civilian, one is a judge or a former judge, and the third is a law enforcement officer of an equal rank to the officer accused. And that's the trial board. They hear, they decide, and then the officer has the chance to appeal again, like within 30 days. If they don't appeal, that decision is final. If they do appeal within 30 days, then the circuit court appeal on the record. I don't know a lot about the circuit court process here, but this is sort of just a rough idea of what is going to be implemented. It is being implemented. It has been implemented. It's at some stage of implementation across all of Maryland. Every county in Maryland is adopting some version of this. Dan, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I recognize, Co-Chair Lloyd, that you said you don't know that too much about this, but what's confusing me is that this is an administrative process where they're talking about finding whether officer violated policy, but the circuit court gets involved I'm circling it with my mouse, but you can't see that. The circuit court gets involved there at the end, which is that implies criminal jurisdiction of some kind. So that's why I'm a little confused by the whole structure here. Is that anything you can speak about offhand, or you want to do more research and find out and bring it back to us, or?
It's not something I can speak about offhand. No, it took me long enough to kind of get a grasp of just even this process. But yeah, I'm happy to take a look at what happens with the circuit court and come back to you. And I'm happy to try to write this up. But does anybody have any other questions about this?
It's fascinating.
Can you share the link to that graphic?
Oh,
in the chat?
definitely. Yeah, I'll drop it in the chat.
Thank you so much, Lavisa. Commissioner Lavisa. Did you also want to talk about Albuquerque?
Yes, I will talk about Albuquerque. I'm just putting that putting that link in the chat so you can take a look at it. And it's sort of funny, if you Google Police Accountability Board Maryland, you'll see a bunch of different counties have their websites with their their websites are explanations, flow charts, etc. But it's all going to be some version of this. The other interesting thing about that legislation is that it repealed the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. So that's just another interesting thing to note. Okay, hold on one second. Okay. Okay, so Albuquerque, New Mexico. Albuquerque, New Mexico has sort of two things working in tandem. They have a police oversight board and they have a civilian police oversight agency. And CPOA is, I would say, sort of the more frontline. It's the more frontline. They receive complaints, they investigate complaints, and they also recommend discipline. And then it goes to the POB, the Police Oversight Board, which is a 9-member civilian board that reviews their findings and then makes recommendations to the chief of police, and the chief of police then agrees or disagrees with those findings. And I do have a flow chart for this one too, but unfortunately I don't have a version of Adobe that will allow me to flip it, and it's not the right direction, so I feel like it's just sort of confusing. Maybe I can, maybe I can drop it in the chat and you all can, if you have a more advanced computer than me, you can flip it yourself. But it's sort of an interesting process. Let me just see. Hold on one moment. There we go. Okay, it should be in the chat for you. Okay, so the Civilian Police Oversight Agency is an independent agency of the city government. It's not a part of either the city administration or the city council. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency receives, investigates, and reviews complaints and commendations submitted by community members for or against the Albuquerque Police Department. They also review, the Civilian Police Oversight Agency also reviews Albuquerque Police Department policies, practices, and procedures, and they make recommendations to the chief of police about those things. So The minimum qualifications for serving on the police oversight board are that you have not been employed by law enforcement for 1 year prior to appointment, successfully passed a background check, personal history lacking any pattern of unsubstantiated complaints against APD. I felt perhaps this was not a best practice. A demonstrated ability to engage in mature impartial decision-making, et cetera, commitment to transparency, residency within the city of Albuquerque. It's really interesting to see sort of what the requirements are for serving on these types of boards. Some places they're so huge, and then some places it's like, you just have to live here, you just have to be a resident. There is no minimum required education or work experience to be considered on this, to serve on this board. And they also still have internal affairs. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency has investigators. Those investigators get 40 hours of training their first year, and then they get 8 hours each additional year. So I thought that was sort of a best practice, is that they have ongoing training and how to do administrative investigations, but also it says the training shall include instruction on Albuquerque Police Department's policies and protocols on taking compelled statements and conducting parallel administrative and criminal investigations. So getting ongoing specialized training in like how to conduct both like these administrative investigations and how to do these parallel investigations. The deadline for administrative investigations is 90 days from the initiation of the complaint investigation, with a possible 30-day extension if the police chief approves it. So essentially, look at the flow chart that I just put there, because I feel like all of these things are just so complicated that I barely can understand anything if I cannot see a flow chart, because it's so many steps. But essentially, there are 4 things that happen. The complaint is assigned to, someone makes the complaint, and then the complaint is assigned to a Civilian Police Oversight Agency investigator, who is supposed to give it a thorough, independent investigation. Then the Civilian Police Oversight Agency Executive Director reviews the outcome of the investigation and recommends the discipline to be imposed, if any. And then the board, the Police Oversight Board, reviews the findings of the Executive Director for final recommendation to the Chief of Police. And then the last thing is that the Chief of Police agrees or disagrees with the final recommendations. And if they disagree, the Chief of Police has 30 days to submit a letter of explanation to the board. So you'll sort of see like on the flow chart, it kind of like, it's like something can come in and then it sort of goes over, and then it essentially comes back to the police side. But not before it's like everything has to pass through this police oversight board. So, and then either, it's a little confusing because I think this is technically the Civilian Police Oversight Board's job, but the language says like either IA or Civilian Police Oversight Board shall recommend one of the following for each allegation. There's unfounded, sustained, not sustained, exonerated, or sustained violation not based on original complaint, or administratively closed. So essentially 6 possible outcomes. And I think I'd probably add or over my time, or maybe I would talk a little bit more about their definitions of those outcomes. But yeah, does anyone have any thoughts or any comments or questions about Albuquerque? They have some pretty great write-ups online as well, so I could send some links.
That would be helpful. Great research. Look, Commissioner, thank you very much. Again, we're thinking about, what are the best practices, and then what are the barriers to accountability. Any thoughts about Albuquerque? All right. I'm wondering if there's any further research that's been conducted by people who reported out last time. Debbie.
So I had said last time that I thought it'd be interesting to look at Seattle, and I've only gotten a start on it, so I'm not going to give the full thing. But so just briefly, they have kind of similar to other things that we've heard about. They have a civilian office that does the, that accepts complaints and investigates. And then they have an Office of Inspector General for Public Safety that conducts systemic reviews and audits. And then they have a community police commission. But the thing that I thought was really interesting, I wanted to share while I'm sort of in the process of doing this, is that they have their investigative staff is administratively with, and I'm not suggesting this is the best practice, I just thought it was interesting. So it's within the police department, and their investigative staff is made up of civilian investigators and sergeants from the police department. And so both, they're all in there, doing their jobs investigating. But the one advantage to having them administratively in the police department is the civilian investigators have equal access to all of the materials, all the files and everything else that the police investigators have. And so I think we all recognize that there are a lot of misgivings amongst the public of having police investigate the police. So this would not be something that we would want to do in Portland, but I just thought it was kind of a interesting way of getting at the whole access to records problem. And it's first time I've ever heard of that approach. I may be more widespread, but it was kind of a new one on me, and I just thought I'd share it. So that's how far, when I get the whole Seattle thing done, I will share it with everybody.
That's wonderful, Commissioner Debbie. Thank you so very much. Commissioner Sophia.
Yes, I had a question for Debbie. I was wondering if that was having them in the same department was the way for getting the civilians access to the documents. So what I was going to ask is, was there, similar to what's going on in Portland, did I'm trying to get my words together. So there wasn't any accommodations for them to get those documents other than from the police department, like for us, we have access to those, or I don't know how it's going to happen, but we're supposed to have access to them. And there was some rule, I can't remember, that IPR said that they had gotten made whole so that they can do that. So so that's what you're saying. It was just a way around, or what? I don't know.
Well, so to tell you the truth, so that all I have read is the civilian oversights, their website. And so right now they're just sort of talking about the mechanics of it all. And there isn't really any like, why do we do this? This is how we do it. And so I would assume then that they did it to address the problem with getting access, because like you said, in Portland, IPR sort of has had to jump through hoops, and there's some delays, and it's not always easy to get the information they need to do a good investigation. And I'm guessing they face similar challenges in Seattle, and this is the solution they came up with. Like I said, I don't think I would not put this on a practice we want to adopt in Portland. I just thought, wow, what an interesting way to deal with that. Just put the civilians in with the police, and then you got it taken care of. So I just kind of wanted to share it because I thought it was, it's just sort of a creative way to get around, the challenges of getting access to the police files.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Any other questions, observations? Any other report outs? Commissioner Dan.
Yes, thank you. So I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a member of the commission. And I was able to talk this afternoon with Paul Parker, who's the executive officer, the staff person at San Diego County Law Enforcement Review Board, or CLERB. that I talked about at our last meeting to clarify some questions that I had after reading a ton of material on their website. And I actually also, through Portland Coffee Watch, have been receiving their monthly minutes of all their meetings for many years, more years than I care to think about. And one of the first questions I asked was about these panels, which I don't know if you remember, but I found in all three of the bodies that I investigated, they all had the ability to break off into small panels to review the cases. And I raised the question about whether you could keep diversity by having a panel of 3 people. So I asked him how often this happens and what he thought about the diversity issue. And he said, that's been a possibility for all 31 years that the CLERB has been around, but it's never happened. Like, they have never had a civilian investigative panel held, which I think is really bizarre. People wanted to remove it from the bylaws, or whatever you want to call it, you know, their guiding documents, and people didn't, other people pushed back and said we should have that there in case we want to use it. So, but then I asked him the diversity question. He said, you know, certainly that's one of the things that we are concerned about in the forefront, and if we ever start doing those, we'd have to figure out how, you know, how that would work with only 3 people. So there's that investigative panel question. One of the other questions I asked, that one of the, and I mentioned this as a possible barrier before, they require complainants to sign a complaint under penalty of perjury. And I said, what happens if they do that and then the finding is unfounded, meaning that there was no evidence that the incident happened at all? And he said, right now, nothing happens. That because the CLERB is not itself a law enforcement agency, they can't or aren't interested in pursuing perjury charges against the people. So I guess that's good for now, but it just seems like, you know, other people, like the police themselves, might be interested in that. So again, I don't recommend that as a best practice. They don't have a mediation program because their charter doesn't allow them to set one up right now. And I don't know that the lack of, I don't remember that mediation is mentioned in our charter. So that's something we should probably look at, whether we're allowed to do it if it's not mentioned. They do have an office building that's separate from the sheriff's office, but they've been moved around a lot. And the most recent place they might land is a county building that's guarded by sheriff's deputies as security. And so that's, you know, clearly could be a barrier, even though he said that they rarely ever getting walk-in clients. That could be a clear barrier. People are complaining about the sheriff's office and they have to walk past sheriff's deputies to get in. So those are things to think about. Then I asked our, like the broad questions at the end that said, what barriers are you facing? He said, number one is that state laws there prohibit transparency, so they can't hold public hearings on cases. They can't reveal officer names. And they can't, and this is probably not as relevant to us because they're looking at a lot of stuff that goes on in the jails, but they can't talk to or investigate medical personnel may have been witness to or somehow contributed to people's deaths in custody. So it's just something, if there's some parallel to that with Portland Police, you might want to think about that. I said, what would you add to your powers if you had a magic wand and could do that? He said he'd like to have audit authority to conduct pattern and practice investigations. And for those of you who don't know, that's how the city ended up in this DOJ lawsuit settlement agreement, that the DOJ did a pattern and practice investigation of Portland Police and found a pattern of excessive force against people in mental health crisis. So that's an interesting idea to have a civilian oversight board that can do that on a local level. He said the LA County Office of the Inspector General has that power. And then my last question on the the non-structural list is, do you have anybody else for us to talk to? And he gave me a couple of names of people, one of whom is from Chicago and did a review of the CLERB that he said was excellent. So if people are interested in taking those names and following up, I'm just as happy to share them with everybody. I shared them with the co-chairs of this subcommittee earlier this evening. And I still have other things I have to follow up on from my earlier research, but that's my report on San Diego, or my updated report on San Diego. And I hope to incorporate all that into the document I posted and make it so that all that information is in there.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Debbie?
Commissioner Handelman, I just have a question about when you talked about how they have the authority to have these small panels, but they've never used them. Does that mean then that all the things they've done with the full board?
Yeah, so again, I don't expect everybody to remember all these details because there's a lot of stuff floating out there. So the San Diego County Review Board has the investigation's done, and then the staff prepares a document for the board that they review at the meeting, and the staff the staff document includes recommendations for findings. So yes, the board makes all the findings themselves as a whole, but they aren't necessarily having these in-depth investigations. They have a package of about probably 7 to 10 cases every month that they're looking at. So they're not spending a whole lot of time on each one, which is why I thought having these small panels would improve the civilian involvement in these investigations, but apparently it hasn't been done. But San Diego City is different, and I'm going to ask them more questions before our next meeting.
So just to clarify, Commissioner Dan, that was San Diego County that you reported on. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the civilian, the County Law Enforcement Review Board, CLERB, and the one in San Diego City is in transition between the old name and the new name, and I can't remember which is which, so I won't even try to tell you which one it is.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other questions or observations around best practices or barriers, specifically around San Diego, or any that have been presented this evening? All right, Commissioner Dan.
Yeah, well, this may come up in the discussion about experts if anybody has anything to report on that. But one of the things that struck me, especially after finding out the demise of the old review board in Minneapolis, is how many of these places make recommendations about the findings to the police commissioner or to the chief, and then those people have the ability to overturn that. And that theoretically is the case most of the time here in Portland right now, but the new charter amendment that we're working on says that our board has the ability to impose discipline directly on the officers. But I reread that today, and that section actually says, to the extent possible under the law. So I'm hoping that we get some read on what that means, so that we don't end up creating a structure that says, oh yeah, they're going to discipline them, and then somebody says, well, okay, but that's not legal, so nice try. So it's just something. I don't want to end up in this position again where we have a board that's supposed to be able to make the findings and impose the discipline, and then they can't do it.
Thank you. I would like for us to go into discussion now. Have an open discussion and ask that we follow our normal discussion rules. So please be brief each time you speak. Even though you can speak multiple times, please be facilitated. And we are now, and remember now that we are using a weighted stack in our discussions. Finally, please be forward-looking in your comments. Would the co-chairs like to frame the discussion and then get it started?
So, Dr. Moses, you want me to frame it?
Pretty please. Thank you so much, Commissioner Sophia.
Do I need to frame it? Do we all understand, or do I need to go into the details? I can. So let me go.
Yeah.
Just give me 1 second. I gotta get to the right page. Give me 1 second, please. Just a second.
We're hoping to put together, co-chairs are hoping to put together areas of agreement on best practices from other jurisdictions. Is that correct? Yes, I would like to call on staff.
Just to clarify, co-chairs are consolidating notes from all the meetings that have happened of the subcommittee so far and building out the content of a draft for the document. There are 2 documents that the subcommittee is passing on to the full commission. This is the first of those areas of agreement on best practices from other jurisdictions. Today, there is not a draft, but co-chairs did develop a structure of what it would look like. If that's something to kind of show, we can show that briefly. It was in the reference documents for today. Is that all right, Co-Chair Sophia?
Thank you. I'm sorry. I've had a lot of background noise here, so thanks for helping me out.
No problem. So it looks like this. For now, this is a starting point of what it would look like, and the content of this is going to be built out by subcommittee members in these discussions, and then my co-chairs are going to prepare and we'll eventually work through it. But the idea is to have what is the best practice, say what one or more jurisdictions. It's not, we saw this in the most possible jurisdictions necessarily. These are jurisdictions that it was identified in that the subcommittee likes, and then justification for explaining that to some more detail and just listing out the best practices. That's the way that it's currently formulated. Of course, that can change over time. Most of the documents that this commission has done so far have structurally changed slightly prior to being approved from the original draft. So that's the idea. And from a process perspective, the subcommittee is going to approve these documents. The subcommittee is going to refer these documents, refer to the full commission, who will then adopt them as an area of agreement of the full commission that will be used to help guide in future phases of work the practices that they recommend to City Council. I'll pass it back over to Co-Chair Sophia.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you helping me out there. So going back to our best practices here, what we want to do is, now that we've heard of, from several members about the practices in these other jurisdictions, so which of those practices do you as a subcommittee member like? Do you think we should be, which ones do you think we should be considering as best practices by the commission? As we were saying, this conversation will be used by the subcommittee co-chairs to put together a draft of our best practices. So just going over, so we could start out with, I guess, San Francisco. So I know that's where we started with Dan. Dan, do you have any suggestions out of your research with San Francisco that you think are best practices that will be helpful for our commission?
Yeah, I'd like more time to get to the other half of the research that Commissioner Thomason and I didn't get to. Can I just ask a question? Since we've been talking about barriers to every person that was coming before us, we say, what are the barriers to police accountability? Can we also put things in this document that we think are barriers and should not be included as the commission moves forward? Because I think that'd be really, really helpful.
Of course, yes. We don't want to end up doing somebody else's bad stuff if we can avoid it. All right. So are there any more? I know, Debbie, you had one that you said you didn't suggest that we should do, but is there any that you would suggest we do?
So, and I've been sort of keeping a list for myself. I just sort of started earlier today, but of things that I think would be really good to have in our system. I do not have them specifically attributed to any particular agency, just things that pop up, as I've been reading them in here. I'd be happy to share what I've got so far. So this is something that has come up in Portland, and I saw it someplace that I thought, oh, we should remember that, is having satisfaction surveys for individuals who file complaints. So when they're done with the whole process, ask them about their experience so that you can improve things as you go along. And then same thing, to have satisfaction surveys for the police officers who are involved in the system, to also find out how they're reacting to the way the process works, and maybe come up with some ideas for improvement from what you hear back from them. So those were those are a couple to start with. And then I started reading that list of references that I pulled out of that Police Oversight Department of Justice booklet. And one of the articles I read was really interesting. It was called Arrested Oversight. And the guy talks about kind of pitfalls and things where you end up with things going badly. And then he does New York City as a case study back during the time when they were doing those stop and frisk things. And so one thing he said that they tried once and they found it was very effective was to have the civilian agency do outreach to police department staff and kind of give them ideas on how to change what they do so that they don't get so many complaints. And it actually resulted in fewer complaints. Of course, they only tried it once, and so you can't necessarily prove that there is a cause and effect. But this is something he thought looked like a promising practice. But later on, if we talk about the academic stuff, I can give you more detail on that. So. But both outreach to the public and to the police department staff seems like a good idea. And I just think this whole idea of having a civilian auditor or an inspector general or whatever you call it, somebody, because once the Department of Justice leaves Portland and the compliance officer leaves, I don't know what we'll have as far as somebody who can actually have access to everything in the police bureau and be able to kind of research how things are going and offer critiques and recommendations for improvement. So I think that's something that would be good to see in our system. And then, another thing is having in our code language specific requirements for the contents of the annual report that our agency does, because the ones that we get now from IPR are kind of very brief, and ones I've seen from other agencies look much more comprehensive and have a lot more information in them, which I think is a good idea. So those are the ones that popped into my head so far as I've been reading this stuff. And in observing the IPR and Citizen Review Committee over the years.
Well, thanks, Debbie. That's actually a lot. You had that so much.
It's a start. I'm sure we'll come up with a ton more.
I'm not complaining. I'm just noting. Thank you. It's been good. You guys. Did a great
One
job.
more, I think Commissioner Dan mentioned was a mediation program. Make sure to put that on the list too.
That was one thing I had thought about anyway, even before the research. I thought that would be a good idea. And I think Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say that Mr. Parker, when I talked to him this afternoon, said that he wished that they did have a mediation program, but they just aren't allowed to under the charter. So I think I said this in an earlier meeting too. I think that should definitely be part of the new system. I also want to look at the question of signed complaints as something that we should not recommend because of the possible barriers. I think that the people of San Diego are just lucky right now, I think, that nobody's pursued a person who signed that under oath and then that was found out that what they said wasn't, completely accurate. I just don't want to put that as a hurdle for people. I wouldn't think we would want to do that. And yeah, and then the idea also that he talked about that he says it exists in LA where they can do a pattern and practice review, much like what the DOJ did, from the federal, crow's nest, where they look down on Portland. I think having somebody local to do that on an ongoing basis to see if there's patterns in practice, I think would be a really helpful thing for this board, trying to change policies and improve training. And what Commissioner Iona just said about New York, telling officers what to do so they don't get misconduct complaints. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to give us a time check at 8:07 and suggest a break if that feels good for everyone. May I have a thumbs up? Thank you so much. So let's come back at 8:15. Return at 8:15, please. Welcome back, everyone. I want to, before we move on to the next section of academics and experts, I want to kind of wrap up around further jurisdictions, any other jurisdictions that you may want to research. Could members please quickly say which jurisdictions they'll have information to present at our July 25 meeting? So if we could go around the room and just quickly say who is presenting what on July 25, that would be so very helpful. So I'm going to call on commissioners. Commissioner Dan.
Well, I'm hoping to have updates about New York and San Diego City and on San Francisco, assuming that I can find time to work with Commissioner Tomlinson and get return calls from those other places. So that's my expectation.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Lavisa.
Sure, I will have some more information about Baltimore and also about just this implementation of this statewide police accountability legislation in Maryland.
Very good. Thank you so much. Commissioner Debbie.
So I'll finish Seattle, and hopefully I reached out to Oakland, the agency and the commission, but hopefully I'll hear back.
Very good. I think Commissioner Angie has stepped away. Commissioner Sophia.
I'll be doing, going back and I'm sorry, just a second. What I'll do is I'll put them in the chat.
That sounds great. And then I'll read them. That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. And so then after having come back from our break, I think we are going to go to our suggestions to consider from experts and academics. And again, we have people who are reporting out. If we could go to the next slide, please. So Commissioner Dan has Campaign Zero and Eileen Luna Firebaugh. Sophia has the NAACP. Catherine and Monica are not here. And again, on the 25th, we'll hear from Catherine because she had other jurisdiction to report out on. And so Dan, Commissioner Dan, I'd love to start with you around Campaign Zero, if you're ready to report out.
So, thank you, Dr. Moses. I wrote to you in the chat earlier that I actually did not have contact with these experts between the last meeting and now. It was a very busy and difficult week last week, but I will try to get in touch with them before the next meeting. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. And Commissioner Sophia says, I'll finish up Columbus, Ohio, Fort Worth, Texas, Austin, Texas, and New Orleans. That sounds wonderful. And in terms of our experts, then I think if we can go back to this, Commissioner Sophia, please. Thank you.
You know what? I'll just let you finish. And
oh, I was going to go back to our slide.
Okay.
And to see if there are any other suggestions around experts that we might want to add. But Commissioner Sophia, go right ahead.
I was just going to give a short update for the NAACP. What I did find out is they do things on a regional and county level with their expertise. So the point is, I'm sort of going back to what we were doing before. We need to look at Portland to see what theirs are, but it makes it really broad because they're all different and they're all independent. So I kind of got a little discombobulated on that, but I did have a reference, a person which is with the Police Accountability Commission in Fort Worth, Texas, that I will have continue the discussion with to see who I should, which states and which counties I should choose for, or regions I should choose for NAACP. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Didn't realize that. I really appreciate that information. Commissioner Dan.
Yes, so I wanted to kind of just read into the record the names of the experts that were recommended to me this afternoon. One is named Max Huntsman, Huntsman. That's the Inspector General in LA County. And the other was Sharon Fairley, Fairley. That's the person at the University of Chicago who ran the expert review of the CLERB in San Diego County. And, given that other workload I have, I am hoping I can find somebody else either on this work group or that we can find from the rest of the commission who might be willing to touch base with those folks. Because I think what's exciting about reaching out and talking to people in person is being able to ask this question, who else do you think we should talk to? And I also, just while I have the floor, I want to point out that a real strength of talking to people in person is, like, I would have no idea that those investigative panels had never taken place if I hadn't called and asked about it. So, yeah, so I don't know if anybody else can volunteer in there right now. I know there's only a few of us still here actively engaged in the meeting, but it would be lovely to be able to find somebody to follow up on those if we can.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Commissioner Dan. And as I would like to have a tightly facilitated conversation about how you might engage the rest of the commission on doing this research. So I'm wondering if people have thoughts about how you might want to go about engaging the rest of the commission. So Commissioner Sophia.
So we did talk about this last meeting. I know Dan mentioned it, and I brought it up to the co-chairs for the commission. And I asked, I told them your questions, like, can we do that? And they said, sure, without any obligations. So what Angie and I were talking about was sending out a letter or email to the rest of the commission using Dan and Debbie's format, the questions to ask, and provide those to that group. And if there are things or there are jurisdictions that we're already doing that you would like assistance on, we can also do that as well. So let's just say, I'm going to use you, Lavisa. You have, pardon me.
That's okay. Little people sounds are always welcome.
Yeah, she has a boo-boo and it's just taking over the world. So anyway, if you have I'm going to use you as example, Lavisa. You said things are quite complicated. If you wanted some assistance in any particular area on researching that particular jurisdiction, we can send that out and have somebody just basically sign up for it. In addition to that, we also, if there's something that some of the other commissioners find as a jurisdiction or a specialist, expert that they want to do, that they could provide that with us as well. So I just want to put that out to the group here and see what you guys think.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia. Commissioner Debbie.
I'm just curious, so, we also have a group that's on the Community Engagement Subcommittee. And I'm curious how many commissioners were actually actively involved lately or left? If you take out the community engagement people and the research committee.
I couldn't.
Yeah, more or less, yeah, just a rough guess.
I couldn't say because I don't follow that group.
Okay.
But I would say that I would just say that probably most of the other ones are on there, but I couldn't say. I think we do have a few people on leave of absence, at least for a little while.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but
Okay, that's fine. I just was curious how much untapped energy is there at this point.
yeah, my brain was thinking the same way.
Yeah.
But I try not to get into that. I'm trying to focus on us. But when I brought it up to the co-chairs, they were very much open, and they thought it was a good idea. And also, I will actually, I was told that the community engagement, they're going to do a similar email. So we'll probably be working on that, having those sent out together so that we can help each other. Just because we're not on that team doesn't mean you don't have anything valuable. It's just that nobody has the time to commit to subcommittee. So
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
But other than that, I think it's a great idea. Obviously, I shouldn't be pessimistic to start with. That's what I should. You should be off feeling, especially if you make the task, defined and not a huge, you sign up to do this one thing, like help Lovisa with Maryland. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
yeah, that seems manageable. So hopefully there'll be people who say yes.
I mean, just because they're not on the commission doesn't mean they don't have some, I call it nugget.
Yeah.
That'll, you never know what it's going to be. And they can help us with ideas. They just, people just can't, they just are spread out pretty thin. And if they could just pop in and give a little information and we can give them a standard form for that, that will be helpful for everyone.
Very true. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Anything else? You're smiling, Lovisa.
Oh, I was just laughing because yeah, Maryland, unfortunately Maryland, it's not necessarily a very tightly defined task. It's sort of like a whole state with 24 new accountability systems. But yeah, I do want to say I do think it's a good idea to reach out. I do think we have at least a small handful of members of the commission who might have some capacity. So I think it's a great idea to ask for help. And actually, for the record, I don't need help with Maryland right now, I think. But I think that people should ask for help for things that are not gonna get a lot of looks or a lot of attention, but definitely should get looks or attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovisa. Commissioner Dan.
Well, one of the things that struck me as I was going through my notes, and as I had that conversation this afternoon asking about the small panels and how you have a diverse panel with 3 people, is that we're not doing this research, especially on paper, we're not getting at some of the values that we spend a lot of time articulating as a commission. So I'm not really sure how to capture that. I mean, I think some of it's going to come from talking to people on the ground, community activists in the cities, about how much do they actually have a commitment to diversity, and how much do they, I guess one of the things I didn't mention about my conversation with Mr. Parker, and I forgot to put this in my notes back about it, is that he said one of the things that happens is that they have some people who call a lot with complaints, and sometimes they're people with mental health issues, and sometimes what they're saying sounds, pretty outrageous, like something that it probably didn't really happen, but you have to listen to them because when what they're saying is true, you need to investigate it. And so that's the kind of thing that isn't written down in any of these documents that we've gotten. That's just one of those things that comes with the experience of processing complaints over the years. So I don't know really how to get at that through our research, but I just want to make sure that we don't forget those values while we're investigating the mechanics of, this, that, the other thing. The oversight board has this many members, blah, blah, blah. So I just thought I'd put that out there.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. As a group, you all will be going back to the values over and over again as you continue to move through this process. And so the values that you have identified will, of course, be your guiding principles. So that is an important observation. So I feel good about that we have a process to invite other people into this discovery process. I would like for us to go back and have a discussion about academics and experts. Debbie, you kind of began that conversation with the arrested, with that document on arrested oversight, but we need to, are there any other suggestions around and considerations for academics and experts, areas of agreement on suggestions to consider from academics and experts?
Well, so if I can follow up on that. So I did that, I made that document that I sent out whenever, a couple of weeks ago, with the citations I picked out of that DOJ report on civilian oversight. So sadly, it was just this afternoon I started looking through, and that would be something that would be really great if there were a couple more people who are willing to, one of us could start at the bottom and one at the top and meet in the middle or something to look at those. But so the first one I looked at was, kind of your standard stuff about oversight system. But this one that I read, Arrested Oversight, by a guy named Stephen Clark, who says he's with the Columbia Law School, but I've been trying to find him because when I read his thing, I thought he would be really fun to listen to. So he wrote this whole he talked about the different models of oversight, but then what all the pitfalls are that are kind of built into each system, how there's these things that are in there that are just part of the system that kind of doom it to, and failures are too strong of a word, but to being somewhat, not living up to what the community's expectations are. Then he goes into this whole case study of New York City and their oversight system. And during the time of the stop and frisk policy that the New York Police Department had. And then, so he talks about how, the police department is doing this thing that eventually everybody decided was a terrible thing to do, but, and it was leading to tons of misconduct and violating people's civil rights and everything. But they were out there just doing it like mad, trying to prevent crime. And at the same time, they have the civilian oversight system that's getting bombarded with complaints, because everybody's upset about this. So then what happens is all these complaints come in, overwhelms the system, and then they have to start dropping some of the functions that they have been part of the whole civilian oversight system, like public outreach, policy research, that kind of stuff. All of that went by the wayside. They started having to weed out complaints, so they could only do some of them because there was just so many. And so in a way, this kind of sort of terrible policy the police department had ended up then sort of destroying their oversight system. And so that's I just thought he would be, like I said, I could not find him on I'm not a great internet searcher, but I couldn't find him. I found some author in Britain and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I would love to hear from him for him to talk about sort of what we have envisioned in our ballot measure and some of the things we're thinking about including in our system, and what he sees as sort of like the potential pitfalls to some of the things we're thinking about. So far that would be my one person I thought, oh, I would love to hear from him. So, but I'll keep going through that list and take names.
Yeah, what is his name again?
It's Stephen, spelled Stephen,
Mhm.
And his last name is Clark with an E on it, Clarke. And when he wrote the thing back in the 2000, I think it was 2007 or something, he was with Columbia Law School. But now I haven't gone to the Columbia Law School's website yet. I just keep doing the DuckDuckGo search, and I haven't gotten very far yet. So I will continue through there and see if I find any other people who are kind of outstanding and sort of more unconventional than we kind of don't need the primer anymore on oversight systems, I don't think. Okay, thanks.
It shows that I just looked it up. It shows he's a British, sorry.
That's not him. I know. It's such a common name, Stephen Clark. Oh my gosh, yes. So there's more than one, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Dan.
Yes, so I mentioned somebody's name that did not end up on the list. And again, I don't know if I have time, and it might have ended up on the list because I said this is somebody who seemed to tend to say that the kind of oversight board that we're working on that does the investigations is too confrontational, and he prefers the audit system, which is kind of like more or less what the older system that we have is. So I don't know, I necessarily agree with him, but I think it'd be helpful to hear his feedback. Anyway, his name is Samuel Walker. This is a book from 2014 that was circulated a couple of years ago when the DOJ first came to town, The New World of Police Accountability. And so again, if there's somebody willing to try to get in touch with Samuel Walker, he was at the University of Nebraska in Omaha. I don't know if he retired,
Right.
but that's I think where you find him. And he's been doing this for decades. I mean, we looked at his research in the early 1990s when we started Portland Cop Watch. So he's somebody that would have a mountain of information that we could ask about.
I remember you mentioning him at our last meeting. Thank you so much, Commissioner Dan. Anyone else? So moving into that conversation around best practices, what do we agree with? Anything that we want to bring up? Yes, staff.
Would it be helpful to show that draft at this point, or would you prefer to wait?
Yeah, I would really like that. Thank you.
So similar to the other document that we looked at earlier, there is a co-chairs prepared a structure for what that would look like for the areas of agreement for suggestions to consider from experts and academics. And it kind of mirrors the same structure in the sense that there's an intro sentence and then there's a suggestion to consider who proposed it. Again, it doesn't need necessarily to be the most gets in its way. Subjectively, the subcommittee wants to refer to the full commission and then a justification. And in the last context, we had suggestions from members of how to structure that differently. So those are welcome as well. I know co-chairs will be revising this and adding content to it as a starting point for discussion July 25th or beyond. So, and as a side note, these are just examples of the things that have been brought up. They're not at all content that'll be necessarily kept. It could be, but that'll be based on what the co-chairs found in their notes in these discussions.
Thank you so much. Any conversation about this document draft? Commissioner Dan.
Yeah, I couldn't hear everything our staff person was saying because they were cutting in and out, but I don't know if it was mentioned that it would be good to have a section in this one too about pitfalls and things to avoid, because I think that's another thing that the experts can help us with.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder and that suggestion. Anyone else? All right, so I guess next steps are again, looking to reach out to commission members to see about how they may want to participate reaching out to commission members about potential other jurisdictions or other academics that you would add to this list. I'm not hearing anything else, so I would love for us to invite the public comment to come in. Yes, public comment to come in. We will now take public comment on the issues the PAC is discussing, or community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length and to raise their hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. Would anyone from the public like to comment? I do not see any hands. So thank you so much. We will go to the garden plot, which would be things discussed in this meeting. And Victoria, I'd like to touch base with you. Do we have any garden plot information to recap?
No, we don't have, I don't have anything in the garden cup, but the staff may have some.
Yes, they may. Staff, please.
Yeah, had three things that were noted. One was revisiting values and goals as part of converting research into best practices or suggestions to consider. And as a side note on this item, I'll drop a link into the chat to see the Police Accountability Commission values and goals, which were approved on March 24th. Second item was to add a not best practices / barriers in other jurisdictions section. The title to be finalized and wordsmithed later to the areas of agreement on best practices from other jurisdictions, which would also potentially be retitled accordingly. And then the third thing is the exact same suggestion, adding a not best practices / barriers that are into the areas of agreement on the experts in academics document. And that's something that the co-chairs would be able to implement and have ready for the draft at the July 25th meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I would like us to then go to our adjournment. Thank you to all of the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. Thank you also to the interpreters supporting access to the meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and its subcommittees for all Portlanders. Thank you to our briefers, or thank you for coming and spending time with us, and for the commissioners in your thoughtfulness, in your research, and for bringing your questions forward. You can give advance public comment prior to future meetings at tinyurl.com/PortlandPAC comment. You can sign up for email updates on the PAC's work at tinyurl.com/PortlandPAC updates. It is now 8:44 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.